Look, let's start with a simple, almost childlike idea. When we think of justice, we picture a grand figure, usually a statue of a woman wearing a blindfold, holding a sword in one hand and a set of scales in the other. That blindfold is not a fashion statement, nor is it there because she lost a bet. It's supposed to signify that justice is impartial. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, what your last name is, or who you know in high places. The scales are meant to weigh the facts of a case evenly, and the sword is there to deliver a fair and just consequence. It's a beautiful concept, really. It's the bedrock of any functioning, civilized society. This idea is hammered into us from a very young age. We are taught that in America, everyone is equal under the law. It's a foundational promise, a core tenet of the entire democratic experiment. It's the principle that ensures a janitor who commits a crime faces the same legal process as a CEO who commits the exact same crime. The law is supposed to be a great equalizer, a monolithic force that applies to every single person. From the person flipping burgers to the person flipping multi-million-dollar real estate deals. No one gets a free pass, and no one gets an extra penalty just because of who they are. That's the theory anyway. But here's the thing about theories. They sometimes have a nasty habit of crashing headfirst into messy, complicated reality. What happens when the person tasked with upholding the law is the one bending it? What happens when the blindfold seems to slip a little, allowing Lady Justice to peek at someone's bank account or their business card before making a decision? Suddenly that beautiful, simple idea of equal justice starts to look a lot less certain. It begins to feel like a promise that was written in disappearing ink, a noble goal that we talk about a lot but don't always practice with the same level of enthusiasm. And that right there is the heart of the problem we need to talk about. We have to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Is our justice system truly the impartial referee we believe it to be? Or is it more like a referee who has a quiet word with one team's captain before the game, assuring them that a few accidental fouls will be overlooked? Because for a growing number of people, the evidence suggests that the game is, in fact, rigged. The playing field is not level, and the rules seem to change depending on which team you're on. It's a suspicion that gnaws at the very foundation of our trust in the system itself.
Perfect.
So let's give this nagging suspicion a name. Experts and regular folks alike have started calling it the two-tier justice system. It's a simple name for a deeply troubling concept. The idea is this: there are essentially two different sets of rules in our legal system. Tier 1 is for the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected. For them, the law can be surprisingly flexible, forgiving, and understanding. Mistakes are seen as momentary lapses in judgment, and punishments are often more symbolic than severe. A fine that's a rounding error in their bank account, a suspension, or a sternly worded letter. It's the legal equivalent of being sent to your room, but your room is a mansion with an infinity pool. Then there is Tier 2. This tier is for everyone else, the ordinary working-class citizens. For this group, the law is rigid, unforgiving, and often brutally harsh. The same mistake that was a lapse in judgment for someone in Tier 1 becomes a life-altering crime. The consequences are not symbolic, they are devastating. They mean crippling fines, years behind bars, a permanent criminal record that follows you forever, and the loss of your job, your home, and your future. There is very little room for understanding or flexibility here. The book isn't just thrown at you, it feels like the entire library is dropped on your head from a great height. Now, to be crystal clear, this isn't necessarily about race or religion, though those factors certainly create their own massive, inexcusable problems within the justice system. The two-tier system we're talking about today operates on a different axis, the axis of money, power, and social status. It's about the privilege that comes with having a powerful title, a famous last name, or the resources to hire a team of the best lawyers money can buy. It's the difference between being able to make a phone call that makes a problem disappear and having to rely on an overworked public defender you just met 5 minutes before your hearing. This creates a bizarre and infuriating paradox. The people who have every advantage in life, the best education, financial security, and powerful connections, are often the ones who are treated most leniently when they break the rules. Meanwhile, those who have the fewest advantages, people struggling with poverty, addiction, or lack of opportunity, are the ones who face the full, unyielding force of the law for much smaller infractions. It's a system that seems to punish the vulnerable while protecting the privileged, which is the exact opposite of what justice is supposed to do. It's fundamentally, profoundly unfair. If you want a perfect, almost comically blatant example of this two-tier system in action, you don't have to look much further than the case of a part-time municipal court judge in New Jersey named Mario Battelli. Now remember, a judge is supposed to be the ultimate embodiment of impartiality. They are the human version of that blindfolded statue, the person we trust to apply the law without fear or favor. Judge Battelli, however, seemed to think his position came with some special family and friends perks, like a Costco membership for the legal system. He decided to use his judicial authority to help his relatives in a private dispute. Here's what happened. Back in 2013, Judge Battelli's family was in a civil disagreement with a contractor. Instead of letting the civil process play out like anyone else would have to, the judge decided to escalate things. He sent an email to his family members advising them on how to file specific criminal charges against the contractor. He even provided a handy list of the exact criminal statutes to use, the NJS 2C charges. To make sure the police took it seriously, he encouraged his family to casually mention his job title. It's the legal equivalent of saying, "My dad owns the dealership," but instead of getting a discount on a car, you're trying to put someone in jail. And that's exactly what his sister-in-law did. When she went to the local court to file the charges, the court administrator was understandably hesitant. This seemed like a civil matter, not a criminal one, but the sister-in-law was prepared. According to official documents, she told the administrator, "No, my brother-in-law is a judge, and he should know. He gave me the charges my father is to sign." She even handed over a copy of the judge's helpful little email. She was essentially using the judge's title as a weapon to intimidate a court official and manipulate the legal process for a personal gain. So, what happened to Judge Battelli for this blatant abuse of power? He used his official position to try and sick the criminal justice system on someone for a private financial dispute. This is a serious ethical breach that undermines the very integrity of the judiciary. Did he face jail time? Did he face criminal charges himself for attempting to influence a legal proceeding? Of course not. This is Tier 1, remember? He received a suspension. That's it, a temporary timeout for using his judgeship as a private concierge service for vendettas. It was a slap on the wrist so gentle it was more like a caress. Now let's step out of Judge Battelli's world and into Tier 2. To really understand the injustice here, we need to compare his slap-on-the-wrist punishment to what happens to ordinary people in that very same state of New Jersey for a completely different kind of offense. Let's talk about something that often ensnares people from disadvantaged backgrounds: drug possession. Specifically, let's look at heroin. This isn't a theoretical exercise, this is about real laws with real life-shattering consequences for thousands of people who don't have a judge in the family. In New Jersey, if you are caught with even a small amount of heroin, we're talking an amount for personal use, not for kingpin-level distribution, you are facing a potential sentence of 5 to 10 years in state prison. Let that sink in. A decade of your life, gone. In addition to that, you could be hit with a fine of up to $150,000. For someone already struggling, a fine like that is not a punishment, it's a financial death sentence. It ensures that even if you get out of prison, you will be crushed by debt for the rest of your days, making it nearly impossible to rebuild your life. And it gets worse. If you are found with 5 or more ounces of heroin with the intent to sell, that's classified as a first-degree crime. The penalties for that are even more severe, putting you in the same category as people who commit the most serious, violent crimes. So, on one hand, you have a powerful judge who deliberately abuses his position to corrupt the legal process for personal gain and gets a temporary suspension. On the other hand, you have a person, often struggling with the disease of addiction, who gets caught with a substance and faces the possibility of spending a decade locked in a cage. The contrast is so stark it's almost sickening. Judge Battelli's actions were a deliberate attack on the integrity of the justice system itself, committed by someone who swore an oath to protect it. A low-level drug offense, while illegal, is often a symptom of much deeper societal problems like poverty, lack of healthcare, and addiction. Yet our system has decided that the judge's crime barely warrants a pause in his career, while the addict's crime deserves to have their life completely and utterly destroyed. This isn't a glitch in the system, it's the system working exactly as the two-tier structure intends. It's very easy for discussions about injustice in America to immediately and understandably focus on race. The racial disparities in our justice system are real, they are horrific, and they demand constant attention and action. But the two-tier system we are examining today is driven by something that often gets less airtime, but is just as pervasive: social class. The uncomfortable truth is that our justice system seems to have a deep, baked-in bias against the poor. Being poor in America is not yet a crime, but it dramatically increases your chances of being treated like a criminal. Think about it for a second. Every single stage of the legal process is harder if you don't have money. Can you afford to post bail? Or will you sit in jail for weeks or months before you've even been convicted of anything, likely losing your job and housing in the process? Can you afford to hire a private attorney who can dedicate hundreds of hours to your case? Or will you be represented by an overworked public defender juggling hundreds of other cases? The answers to these questions have less to do with guilt or innocence and everything to do with the number of zeros in your bank account. Research from all over the world confirms this. A 2022 study from Cardiff University in the UK, for example, found that the imprisonment rate in the 10 most deprived areas was a staggering 10 times higher than in the 10 least deprived areas. A huge percentage of the prison population grew up in poverty, was in the foster care system, or was unemployed before they were incarcerated. And here's a wild fact. While our governments meticulously track data on prisoners based on their ethnicity, gender, and religion, they often systematically ignore class. It's as if they don't want to see the most obvious pattern of all. This blind spot for class allows the myth of a merit-based system to survive. It allows people to believe that those in prison are there simply because they made bad choices, rather than acknowledging that their choices were often severely limited by the circumstances they were born into. A wealthy teenager caught with drugs gets help and a second chance. A poor teenager in the same situation is seen as a thug who needs to be locked up. Same action, different zip codes, vastly different outcomes. The two-tier system isn't just about punishing crimes, it's about punishing poverty. The two-tier system isn't just for judges and the wealthy elite, it extends to another group of powerful individuals who are supposed to enforce the law, the police. When a police officer breaks the law, the system designed to hold them accountable often seems to bend over backward to protect them instead. We see this time and time again in cases of misconduct or excessive force. An incident occurs, there's public outrage, and then a familiar pattern unfolds. The officer is placed on administrative leave, which is often just a paid vacation. Then comes the internal investigation, conducted by their own colleagues. This process is fundamentally different from what an ordinary citizen would experience. If you were accused of assault, you wouldn't be investigated by your buddies from your bowling league. You would be arrested, charged, and face a prosecutor. But for police officers, there's often a protective barrier, sometimes called the blue shield or blue wall of silence. This culture, combined with powerful police unions and legal protections not available to the general public, creates a separate and much more lenient track of justice. It's Tier 1, with a badge. Even when an officer is found to have committed wrongdoing, the consequences are often shockingly mild. Instead of being fired and facing criminal prosecution, they might be allowed to quietly resign. In some cases, they are simply transferred to a different police department in another town, free to continue their career with a clean slate. This practice has been called the wandering officer phenomenon. It's a game of passing the buck, where a problem officer is simply shuffled around, leaving a trail of potential harm in their wake, without ever facing real, lasting accountability for their actions. This creates an incredibly dangerous double standard. We grant police officers immense power, the power to detain people, to use force, and even to take a life. In exchange for that power, we should demand the absolute highest standard of conduct and the most rigorous accountability. Instead, we have a system that often does the opposite. It shields them from the consequences that would crush any other citizen. This not only denies justice to their victims but also sends a clear message to the public: the people who enforce the law are not always required to follow it themselves. When people see a judge getting a pass for abusing his power, or a police officer avoiding consequences for misconduct, it does more than just cause outrage in that one specific case. It has a corrosive, domino-like effect on the entire society. It chips away at the most important currency any government or legal system has: public trust. Trust is the glue that holds a democracy together. We trust that the system, even if imperfect, is at least trying to be fair. When we see blatant evidence that it is not, that glue begins to dissolve. This loss of faith is not a small thing, it's catastrophic. When people believe the system is rigged, they stop believing in the system itself. They start to see the courts not as halls of justice but as theaters of power. They see police not as protectors but as enforcers for the privileged. This cynicism can lead to a breakdown in social cohesion. Why should you follow the law to the letter when you know that others are getting away with breaking it? Why participate in a system, by voting, by serving on a jury, by cooperating with law enforcement, that you believe is fundamentally unjust? This erosion of trust has profound, real-world consequences. It can make it harder to solve crimes, as witnesses may be unwilling to come forward and cooperate with a police force they don't trust. It can make it harder to govern, as citizens become increasingly alienated from and hostile toward their institutions. It creates a vicious cycle. As people disengage from the system becomes even less accountable, which in turn causes even more people to disengage. It's a downward spiral that weakens the very fabric of our society, and the perception is backed by reality. People aren't just imagining things, they see the headlines. A wealthy celebrity gets probation for a crime that would send anyone else to prison for years. A politician caught in a corruption scandal pays a fine and moves on. Meanwhile, they see stories of people being jailed for being unable to pay traffic tickets. The message that the two-tier system sends is loud and clear. Justice is a commodity that can be bought, and if you can't afford it, you're out of luck. That is a devastating message for any democracy to send to its citizens. So, we've established the problem. It's big, it's ugly, and it's doing real damage. The question is, what do we do about it? Throwing our hands up in despair is not an option. The path forward, the only path forward, is through a relentless and unwavering demand for accountability. This isn't about revenge or soaking the rich, it's about restoring the core principle that the law must apply equally to everyone, regardless of their title, their wealth, or their uniform. Accountability is not an optional extra, it is the essential ingredient for a just society. This means we need to demand more from our institutions. For judges like Mario Battelli, a suspension is not enough. An abuse of judicial power should be met with removal from the bench and a full, independent criminal investigation. There should be zero tolerance for using a judgeship as a personal tool of intimidation. We need to create a system where the guardians of the law are held to the highest possible standard, because their ability to sit in judgment of others depends entirely on their own integrity. Anything less makes a mockery of their role. The same goes for law enforcement. The wandering officer phenomenon must end. We need national databases to track police misconduct so that officers who are fired for cause can't just get a job in the next town over. We need truly independent civilian oversight boards with the power to investigate and discipline officers. The special legal protections that make it so difficult to prosecute police need to be re-examined. Holding police accountable isn't being anti-police. It's being pro-good policing. It's how you build trust between communities and the officers who serve them. Ultimately, this is about drawing a hard line in the sand. We, as a society, have to decide that we will no longer accept a system where the powerful play by a different set of rules. This requires an active and engaged citizenry that pays attention, calls out injustice, and demands reform from its elected officials. It requires supporting journalism that exposes these disparities and legal aid organizations that fight for the underprivileged. It is a long, difficult fight, but it is the only way to begin closing the gap between the two tiers and moving closer to the ideal of one justice for all. So, is justice really blind? The evidence we've looked at suggests that, at the very least, her blindfold has slipped. In too many cases, it seems she peeks to see if you're arriving in a limousine or on a bus before she picks up her scales. The two-tier system, where the rich and powerful are cushioned from the law while the poor and ordinary are crushed by it, is not some fringe conspiracy theory. It is a visible, painful reality, demonstrated in the tale of every Judge Battelli who gets a pass and every low-level offender who loses a decade of their life. This disparity, this fundamental unfairness, does more than just ruin individual lives. It poisons the well of public trust, fostering a deep and dangerous cynicism that eats away at the foundations of our democracy. When people lose faith in the fairness of the law, they lose faith in the government that is supposed to enforce it. The idea of equal justice under law ceases to be a cherished principle and becomes a bitter joke. We cannot let that happen. The stakes are simply too high for the entire American experiment. Rebuilding that trust is a monumental task, but it is not an impossible one. It begins with the simple, radical act of demanding that the rules apply to everyone equally. It means holding powerful people accountable, not with gentle slaps on the wrist, but with the full and appropriate force of the law they swore to uphold. Every time a corrupt official is prosecuted, every time an abusive officer is held responsible, every time a wealthy defendant faces the same justice as a poor one, a small piece of that broken trust is restored. This is the work we must commit to. We have to fight to lift the blindfold back into place and ensure the scales are properly balanced once more. Justice should not depend on your social status, your bank balance, or your job title. It should depend on one thing and one thing only: the facts of the case. Achieving that ideal is the only way to ensure that the promise of America, the promise of a nation with liberty and justice for all, is not just a hollow phrase, but a living, breathing reality for every single one of its citizens.